The night was cold and flat across the Texas plain, the kind of cold that settles into the chest and stays. A woman stepped into the edge of the firelight, clothes, torn hands trembling, and she didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for food. She looked at Caleb across the fire and said quietly, "May I warm up by your fire until morning?" His hand moved toward his gun without thinking. Behind him, inside the wagon, his 6-year-old son was asleep. The only thing he had left in the world. One question. One night. 3 lives about to change. Caleb didn't say yes. He didn't say no either. He just watched her the way a man watches something he doesn't yet know is dangerous, and let the silence do the work that his words couldn't. The woman stayed at the edge of the light, not pushing forward, not stepping back. Her coat was thin for the weather. One shoulder seam split open, and the hem of her dress was dark with mud from the knees down. She held her hands in front of her, like she was offering them for inspection. Empty. No weapon. No trick. Just 2 raw, cold hands and a question she'd already asked once. Caleb had been on the trail for 6 days, 80 head of cattle a wagon, a horse named Duke, and one 6-year-old boy who asked too many questions during the day and slept like a stone at night. The plan was simple. Push the herd to Hayes Station's cell, take the money home, repair the fence line before the first hard frost, and figure out the rest from there. He hadn't planned on a stranger walking out of the dark. He didn't move his hand away from the gun, but he didn't draw it either. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. His voice came out flat the way it did when he was being careful. Clara told him the name of the town, a small place 2 days east, the kind that doesn't appear on most maps. She said she'd been walking since before noon. She said it without complaint, just as a fact, the way you'd describe the weather or the direction of a road. Caleb studied her face while she spoke. There was no performance in it. No angling for sympathy. No careful arrangement of details to produce a particular effect. That was the thing that unsettled him most. People who wanted something usually performed. She wasn't doing that. "What happened in that town?" he asked. She looked at the fire instead of at him when she answered. The engagement had been called off 3 weeks before the wedding. Her family had no dowry to offer, and the man's family had decided that was reason enough. The town, which had already been watching and waiting, took the broken engagement as a verdict. She became the kind of woman people stepped around on the street. She lasted 2 more weeks before she understood that staying was its own kind of punishment. So she left. She took what she could carry, which wasn't much, and she walked. She said all of this in the same flat, even tone, like she was telling a story about someone she used to know. Caleb couldn't tell if that meant she was very strong or very broken, and he wasn't sure the difference mattered right now. He was still working out what to say when a small voice came from inside the wagon. "But Papa." Caleb turned. Eli was sitting up in his bedroll, hair pressed flat on one side from sleep, blinking at the fire, with the unhurried confusion of a child, waking in the middle of something he didn't understand yet. He was 6 years old and small for his age, with his mother's dark eyes, and a habit of going very quiet whenever something new appeared in front of him. He didn't cry at new things. He just looked at them the way he looked at everything, like he was filing it away somewhere inside him for later. He looked at Clara. Clara looked back. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then Eli reached into the front pocket of his shirt. The pocket. He kept things in small things he collected off the ground on the trail. A gray feather, a piece of quartz, a dry seed pod he'd found 2 days ago, and pulled out a small, smooth stone. It was blue-green, the color of shallow creek water, with one side worn flat. He'd picked it up on the 2nd day of the drive and hadn't let it out of his pocket since. He climbed down from the wagon, walked to where Clara was sitting, and placed the stone on her knee. Then he went back to the wagon and lay down again. The stone sat on her knee, pale and small in the firelight. Something in the air shifted. Caleb didn't have a word for it. He just noticed that his hand was no longer near the gun. He told her she could stay until morning. Nothing more than that. By the time the fire had burned down to coals and the plane had gone fully quiet, Clara was asleep on the ground, near the wagon, wrapped in a spare blanket Caleb had set out without saying anything about it. He sat up a while longer, watching the cattle settle, watching the dark past the edge of the firelight. He wasn't thinking about the drive. He was thinking about the way she'd spoken that flat, practiced calm, and about what it cost a person to talk about their own life, like it had happened to someone else. He'd learned to do the same thing after his wife died. It was the only way to get through a day. He didn't sleep much. In the morning, Clara was up before him. She'd added wood to the fire and had water heating in the pan he'd left out. She wasn't in his supplies. She'd used only what was already set out, nothing more. When he came out from the wagon, she was crouched by the fire with her arms resting on her knees, watching the water. "You know horses?" he asked. "I grew up on a farm," she said. "East of Abilene. We had horses. Working horses. Not just riding. Working," she said. "My father ran cattle until I was 14. After that, it was grain, but the horses stayed." Caleb poured himself a cup of water and looked at the herd. 80 head was manageable for 2 experienced riders on flat ground. It was less manageable with 1 rider and a 6-year-old in a wagon. He'd been doing the math since before Amarillo and hadn't liked the answer. He was short a hand, and he'd known it before the drive started. He'd pushed anyway, because there was no other choice. He still didn't have another choice. But now there was a variable he hadn't accounted for, standing 3 feet away and waiting for him to say something. He set down his cup. "I've got 4 weeks to haze," he said. 80 head, 1 wagon with my son in it. I need someone who can ride a flank and hold it." He looked at her directly. "I'm not offering charity. You work like any other hand. Same hours, same load. You fall behind, you leave. If I think you're a risk to my son at any point for any reason, you leave. Those aren't conditions I'll negotiate." Clara met his eyes. She didn't look offended. She didn't look relieved either. She just looked like someone who was listening carefully and deciding. "And if I work the full drive?" she asked. "Fair pay at the end. Same rate as any hand I'd have hired in town." She looked at the herd for a moment, then back at him. "All right," she said. That was all. No questions about the timetable. No negotiating the rate. No checking whether the terms were fair. She just said all right, stood up, and asked him where he kept the extra saddle. Caleb watched her walk toward the wagon. He hadn't expected that. He'd half expected her to push back or to thank him in a way that would make him feel obligated. She did neither. She just moved the way someone moves when they've made a decision and don't see any point in standing around about it. Eli appeared at the side of the wagon, already dressed, watching her sort through the gear. "Are you coming with us?" he asked. "For now," she said. He thought about that for a second, then nodded, like it was a reasonable arrangement, and went to find his boots. Caleb cinched Duke's saddle and said nothing, but he watched the 2 of them, the boy and the woman, both quiet in their own ways, both carrying something they hadn't said out loud, and he felt for the first time in a long time that the drive might go differently than he'd planned. He didn't know yet if differently meant better. He just knew it meant something. They broke camp an hour after sunrise. Clara rode the left flank without being told to. Eli sat up in the wagon, with his feet hanging over the board, and his hat pulled low against the morning glare. The cattle moved south across the flat ground, slow and steady, and the plain opened up ahead of them in every direction. The journey had started. Whatever it was going to be, it had started. The first week was the kind of work that doesn't leave room for much else. Up before light in the saddle, before sunrise, and still moving when the last color faded out of the sky. The cattle set the pace, and the cattle didn't care about tired legs or raw hands, or the fact that the wind off the plain had an edge to it that cut straight through a coat. Clara rode the left flank every day without complaint. She wasn't flashy about it. She didn't overwork the horse or try to prove anything. She just stayed where she was supposed to stay, kept the stragglers from drifting, and did it quietly enough that Caleb sometimes forgot for a stretch of an hour or two that she hadn't always been there. He noticed her hands on the fourth day. The reins had worn through the skin on both palms, shallow cuts, the kind that sting every time you grip something. She hadn't said a word about it. He saw them when she was helping Eli down from the wagon at the midday stop, the dried blood brown against her fingers. She caught him looking and pulled her hands back, not embarrassed exactly, just private about it. Caleb set a pair of old work gloves on her bedroll that evening. He didn't say anything about it. She didn't either. Eli had his own way of attaching to things. It wasn't loud or sudden. It happened the way water moves into dry ground, slow, and then all at once. By the end of the first week, he was spending his midday rest sitting next to Clara instead of in the wagon, telling her things in the unhurried, circling way that children talk when they trust you enough not to get to the point quickly. He told her about the feather in his shirt pocket found it near a creek 2 summers ago. Belonged to a red-tailed hawk, he was pretty sure, because of the color on the bottom edge. He told her that Duke was a good horse, but that he snored, which was something most people didn't know about horses. He told her that his father made the same 2 meals every night on the trail because those were the only 2 things he knew how to cook, and that both of them tasted better with more salt, but his father never added enough. Clara listened, not the way adults listen to children half present waiting for the talking to stop, but the way you listen when you actually want to know. She asked him follow-up questions. She remembered what he'd said the day before and asked about it the next day. Eli noticed. Children always notice things like that. Caleb watched from a distance and didn't say anything about it. He told himself it was fine. The boy needed company. That was all it was. But at night when the camp went quiet and he sat up keeping watch, he'd find himself turning things over in his head that he hadn't expected to turn over. About how long a person could keep their distance before it stopped being caution and started being something else. About whether protecting Eli meant keeping everyone out or just keeping the wrong people out. About the difference between those 2 things and how he'd been so sure he knew it. He hadn't let himself be unsure about much since his wife died. He wasn't sure he liked starting now. Clara had her own quiet war going on that Caleb couldn't see. The work itself was manageable. She'd done harder. What she hadn't prepared for was the silence between her and Caleb, not hostile, just careful, and what it did to her over days. He paid her on time, assigned work, clearly never asked more of her than he asked of himself. He was a fair employer in every measurable sense, but he didn't talk to her the way he talked to his son, and he didn't look at her the way someone looks at a person they trust. And after 10 days of that, the fairness started to feel like a verdict. She'd told herself she was done caring about verdicts. She'd left her town for that reason. But apparently leaving a place didn't mean you left the habit of measuring yourself against what other people saw when they looked at you. At night, when the fire was low and Eli was asleep, the thought came back to the same question and turned on it, the way a horse turns on a bad smell. Was she doing the right thing? Or was she just running? The engagement had fallen apart because of money, but she'd been walking away from that town long before the wedding was called off. She'd been walking away since she was 17 and understood that the life that town was offering her was too small to fit inside. She just needed something to make the walking official. And now she was here on a cattle drive she hadn't planned for, working for a man who barely looked at her, getting attached to a 6-year-old who collected rocks. She didn't know what this was. She didn't know if it was a beginning or just another version of moving through without landing. She kept working. It was the only answer she had. The storm came on the 14th day without much warning. The sky had been wrong since afternoon, that flat, greenish light that flattens everything and makes sound carry farther than it should. By the time Caleb called camp and started securing the wagon, the wind had picked up enough to lean into. The cattle were already uneasy, bunching and shifting, reading the air the way cattle do when they know something is coming. The storm hit hard just after dark. Rain, then hail, then a crack of lightning that landed close enough to bleach the whole plain white for a full second. After that, the cattle moved. Not trotting, not drifting, running all 80 of them east across the flat ground, the whole mass of them turning into a single dark shape, moving fast through the rain. Caleb was already in the saddle. He cut around the left edge of the herd, trying to get ahead of the lead animals, and turned them before they spread too far. The hail had stopped, but the rain was still heavy, the kind that makes it hard to see more than 30 feet. He heard the calf before he saw it, a high broken sound, underneath the thunder, coming from the middle of the moving herd. He located it in a gap between two larger animals, a young calf maybe 3 months old down on one knee, trying to get up and failing. In another 10 seconds, the animals behind it would close over it, and that would be the end. Caleb calculated the angle and the distance, and made the only reasonable decision available to him. "Leave it," he shouted to no one in particular, to the rein, to the math. "Let it go." He pulled Duke hard to the left to get around the lead animals before they spread further. That was the job. Save the herd, cut the losses, do the math. Then Clara rode into the middle of the herd. He saw her go in, and his first instinct was to shout at her to stop. But she was already 10 feet into the moving mass of animals, riding low and tight, cutting the horse sideways through a gap that shouldn't have had enough room. The cattle were still moving, the rain was still heavy, and she was somewhere in the middle of it where he couldn't see her anymore. For a full 30 seconds there was nothing, just the sound of the herd and the rain and the thunder stacking on top of each other, and Caleb sat on Duke at the edge of the herd and didn't breathe. From somewhere behind him, high and thin, and cutting through all the other noise, he heard Eli's voice. "Clara!" Then louder, "Clara!" The boy was standing up in the wagon, both hands gripping the sideboard, calling her name into the dark and the rain. Not crying, just calling with the full force of 6 years of certainty that the person you call will come back. Clara came out the far side of the herd, with the calf across her lap, one arm wrapped around its chest, the horse moving at a fast trot away from the animals still running behind her. She pulled up next to a low rise in the ground, got down, and set the calf on its feet. It stood. It walked 3 steps and stood again. She looped a short rope around its neck and tied it to the wagon wheel, steady, breathing alive, and left it there while she went to help turn the rest of the herd. Caleb got the herd turned 15 minutes later. By the time he rode back, the calf was settled against the wagon wheel, calm now that the noise had passed. Clara was wringing water out of her sleeve like it was laundry. He looked at her. She looked back at him, waiting for the reprimand the same direct way she'd waited for everything else. He didn't have one. What he had was the memory of watching her disappear into the running cattle and the specific weight of not knowing what was going to come out the other side. He had known that weight before. It was the weight of caring about what happened to someone. He hadn't expected to feel it for her. He didn't say any of that. He just nodded once and went to check on Duke. Her shoulder had taken the impact at some point during the ride through the herd. She didn't know exactly when, probably when one of the larger animals had knocked into the horse, and the horse had stumbled, and she'd caught herself against the saddle horn. By the time camp was reset and the cattle were settled, she could lift the arm but not rotate it, and the muscle across the top of the shoulder had gone stiff and hot. She was working on the bandaging alone, or trying to. The angle was wrong for her other hand, and the cloth kept slipping. She'd gotten it wrapped twice, and lost it twice, and was starting the 3rd attempt when Caleb sat down next to her. He didn't ask. He just took the cloth from her hand and did it himself. Firm, even passes around the shoulder, the right amount of pressure, the knot placed where it wouldn't dig in when she lay down. His hands were certain about it, in the way that hands are certain when they've done something many times before. Clara looked straight ahead while he worked. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say anything. But when he finished and stood up to leave, she pressed her hand briefly over the bandage, not adjusting it, just resting it there for a moment. And something in her face changed in a way that was too small and too quick for Caleb to name. He walked back to the other side of the fire. He was aware in a way he hadn't been aware of anything personal in a long time, that his hands were still remembering the shape of that task. He sat down and looked at the fire and didn't think about it directly. He just let it sit there, the way you let something sit when you're not ready to look at it straight. 3 nights later, the fire had burned low, and Eli was stretched out on his bedroll with his hat over his face. That particular kind of almost asleep that children have, where they're still technically present, but no longer responsible for what they say. Clara was on the other side of the fire, turning her gloves over in her hands, the ones Caleb had left on her bedroll. She'd kept them. They were too big for her. She wore them anyway. She said it without any particular setup, the way she said most things, like she'd been carrying it for a while and just decided to set it down. "People used to tell me I failed as a woman," she said. "Not that I did anything wrong specifically, just that I was the wrong shape for it. Too many opinions, not enough patience for the parts that were supposed to come naturally." Caleb watched the fire. Eli's voice came from under the hat, unhurried and half-muffled. "Then why did you save the calf?" Clara turned her head toward him. The boy hadn't moved, hat still over his face. But he wasn't asleep. She didn't answer right away. Not because she was avoiding the question, because it had gone somewhere she hadn't expected it to go. The people who'd said those things about her had never once asked her a question like that. They described her, assessed her, found her insufficient. No one had ever pointed at something she'd actually done and asked her to reconcile the two. Caleb looked across the fire at her. She was still looking at Eli, and there was something in her face that was open in a way it hadn't been before. Not broken, just unguarded. Like something she'd been holding for a long time had shifted its weight. He said it quietly, not making a speech of it. "That wasn't failure. What you did out there." He kept his eyes on the fire when he said it. "That was the other thing." Clara looked at him. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. After a moment, Eli took the hat off his face, looked at the stars, and put it back. He was asleep within 2 minutes. They reached Hayes Station on a Thursday afternoon, 26 days after breaking camp on the plain. The town sat low against the horizon. The station's water tower, the first thing visible from the trail, then the rooftops, then the smell of coal smoke and livestock, and the particular press of noise that towns have when you've been away from them a long time. Caleb completed the sale the following morning, 80 head at a fair price, enough to cover the fence line and the winter stores, and a few of the repairs the house had been waiting on for 2 years. He settled the accounts, signed the paperwork, and walked back to where Clara was waiting near the wagon. He counted out her wages, the full amount, the same rate he'd have paid any experienced hand he hired in town. He set the bills in her hand and said she'd earned it. Neither of them said anything else. Across the street, the afternoon train sat at the platform. The departure board showed it leaving in 40 minutes heading west. A few people were already loading bags. Caleb unhitched the wagon and walked Clara over to the general store to collect the supply order he'd prearranged by letter 2 weeks before the drive ended. Winter feed, flour lamp oil, a list of items that told its own story about what a single man with a child and a farm was trying to hold together going into the cold months. He read the order aloud to the clerk while Clara stood beside him. She didn't say anything at the time. Then he began loading the crates, and Clara walked toward the platform. Eli sat on the wagon board with his feet hanging over the edge and watched everything. The 40 minutes began to run. Clara walked to the platform alone. She didn't decide to do it consciously. She just found herself moving in that direction after Caleb turned back to the wagon, her feet carrying her across the dusty street toward the sound of the train idling at the rails. The platform was half full, a few families with luggage, a man in a dark coat reading a paper, two women talking close together near the far end of the boarding car. Normal people going somewhere on purpose with a plan already made. She stopped at the edge of the platform where the planking ended and the rail ties began, and looked west down the line where the track ran straight and flat until it disappeared into the distance. That was the direction the train was going. West, away from the town that had decided what she was worth. Away from the broken engagement and the sideways looks and the particular exhaustion of being known by people who had already made up their minds about you. She had the money in her coat pocket, enough for a ticket and several weeks besides. She could be in a new place by morning. A place where no one knew her name, where she'd be just another woman getting off a train and looking for work, blank and undefined, free to become something that hadn't been pre-decided for her. That was the thing she'd wanted for years. She was standing directly in front of it. The train let out a slow exhaust of steam, and the conductor at the far end of the platform called out that boarding would begin in 10 minutes. Clara looked at the train. She looked at the track running west. She stood there and waited to feel the relief that was supposed to come when you finally have the thing you've been moving toward. It didn't come. What came instead was a very specific memory. Not the storm, not the cattle, not Caleb's hands wrapping the cloth around her shoulder in the dark. Something smaller than all of that. The first night the fire half burned down the plain, going silent around them, and Eli climbing down from the wagon in his stocking feet and placing a small blue-green stone on her knee. No explanation, no transaction. He'd simply seen her sitting there and decided to give her the best thing he had. She hadn't done anything to earn that. She'd just been there cold and uncertain and not yet sure if she'd made a mistake by staying. And a 6-year-old boy with his mother's dark eyes had looked at her and seen something worth giving his best stone to. She thought about the 40 minutes she'd spent on the left flank every day, riding into the wind with her hands wrapped in gloves that were 2 sizes too big. She thought about the midday stops and Eli's voice working its way through the story of the hawk feather, unhurried and trusting. She thought about the fire 3 nights ago and Eli's question coming from under his hat. Then why did you save the calf? And the way that question had gone somewhere inside her that the years of other people's assessments had never reached. She wasn't running from a town anymore. She understood that now, standing at the edge of the platform with a train idling in front of her. She'd stopped running somewhere around the 14th day, somewhere in the middle of a stampede, when she'd ridden into a moving herd without thinking, because it was the right thing to do, and her body had known it before her mind did. You didn't run towards something if you were only running away. The conductor called the 5-minute warning. Clara turned around and walked back across the street. Caleb was at the side of the wagon lashing down the last of the supply crates when he heard her footsteps behind him. He didn't turn immediately. He finished the knot he was tying, checked it twice with his thumb, and then straightened and looked at her. She was holding out a portion of the bills he'd given her an hour ago, roughly half counted and folded. She held it toward him without any preamble. "For the winter feed," she said. "The hay allocation on that order won't carry 80 head through February. You'll be short after the fence repairs." Caleb looked at the money. He didn't take it yet. "That's your wages," he said. "You worked for that." "I know what I worked for," she said. "I'm choosing what to do with it." She kept her hand extended steady, waiting for him to take it, or not take it. "You can call it an investment if that makes it easier. I'd like a reason to see how the fence line turns out." He looked at her face for a long moment. There was no performance in it. There never had been, not once in the 26 days he'd known her. That was still the most disarming thing about her. He took the money. She put her hands in her coat pockets and looked at him with the same directness she'd had on the first night across the fire. That quality of having decided something and not needing him to validate it before she said it out loud. "I don't have a dowry," she said. "I don't have family who'll vouch for me. I know that's not the usual way of things." She wasn't apologizing for any of it. She was just stating the conditions the way you state the conditions of a trail before you ask someone to ride it. "What I have is a good seat on a horse, and enough sense to pull a calf out of a stampede when it needs pulling. And I know how to be somewhere without making it worse." She let that settle for a moment. "I'd like to stay, if that's something you'd consider." Caleb didn't answer right away, not because he was uncertain. He'd stopped being uncertain about this somewhere around the moment he'd watched her come out the far side of the running herd with a calf across her saddle. He just needed a second to find the right words for a situation he hadn't been in before and hadn't thought he'd be in again. Before he could find them, Eli appeared at the corner of the wagon. The boy had been sitting on the far side with his back against the wheel, apparently engaged with something in his shirt pocket. But he'd been listening, because children who are quiet are almost always listening. He walked around to where Clara was standing and looked up at her with the unhurried focus he gave everything that mattered to him. "Can I see the stone?" he asked. Clara reached into her coat pocket and held it out. He took it in both hands, turned it over once, and looked at the flat, worn side the way he'd looked at it the night he found it. Then he placed it back in her palm and closed her fingers around it. "You should keep it," he said. Then, without changing his tone, "Are you going to stay?" Clara looked down at him. "Yes," she said. "For real." Eli nodded once, like the matter was settled to his satisfaction, and went back to his side of the wagon. Caleb put the folded bills inside his jacket and looked at the middle distance for a moment. Then he said in the same practical tone he'd used on the first morning, the tone that meant he'd made a decision and was simply reporting it. "The house needs work before it's livable for 3 people. The south room has a bad wall. That'll take a few weeks to fix properly." He was looking at the wagon when he said it. Not at her, the way he looked away from things that mattered to him. Eli's been riding for a year, but he's got no one to teach him the right habits. And he can't read yet, which is something that needs to start soon. He turned and looked at her, then fully. "I'm not a man who says things he doesn't mean," he said. "So I won't say more than I know right now. What I know is that the drive was better with you on it, and I think the rest might be too." It was the most he'd said about anything personal in as long as he could remember. He felt the weight of it leaving his mouth and wasn't sure what he expected back. Clara didn't give him a speech. She just looked at him with that steady, open expression, not guarded anymore, not arranged for effect, and nodded. "That's enough," she said. They left Hayes Station an hour before sunset, the 3 of them riding west, with the empty wagon rattling light behind Duke. The sky ahead was the particular shade of orange that happens when the air is clear and the sun is low, the kind of color that makes the flat land look almost beautiful. The cattle were gone, sold and signed over, and without them, the plain felt wide and unhurried, in a way it hadn't during the drive. Eli rode on the wagon board with the blue-green stone in his shirt pocket. Clara had given it back to him when they were loading up, and he'd taken it without argument, the way he accepted all gifts, as a simple fact. He watched the horizon the way he watched everything quietly on his own terms. Clara rode beside the wagon on the left, same position as the whole drive. She didn't think about it consciously. It was just where she knew to be. Caleb rode Duke slightly ahead, the reins loose in his hands, the tension he'd carried in his jaw and shoulders for as long as he could remember, sitting a little lighter than usual. He wasn't thinking about the fence line or the south wall or the hay allocation, though all of those things were real and waiting. He was just riding in the late October light, heading home. For years, going home had meant going back to something diminished, a house with one less person in it, a life running on the machinery of necessity, without much else underneath it. He'd gotten good at it. He'd told himself that getting good at it was enough. He hadn't been right about that. He understood that now, with the wagon wheels turning behind him, and Eli's voice starting up about something the hawk feather again, or the color of the sky, or some question that had been sitting in the back of his mind all day, and was only now finding its way out. He couldn't hear the words yet. He just heard the sound of them easy and unguarded floating back across the plain. He didn't turn around. He just listened. For the first time in a long time, going home meant something was beginning, not ending. The three of them rode west into the fading light, and the plain opened ahead of them the way it always did, wide and quiet and full of whatever came next.